Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Midland Cultural Center, and welcome to A Day in the Life. Now, here is the host of A Day in the Life, Fred Hacker.
So, without further ado, would you please join with me in welcoming Marie Henein.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
Have a seat, Marie. We're so happy you're here.
Thank you.
And we're fascinated by your story. I must tell you that having read your autobiography, which we will mercilessly plug all night long, I'm just intrigued by your backstory. I'm intrigued by your family story. I'm intrigued by members of your family. I know a lot of these people would like to get to know you better, but they'd also like to obviously talk about some of the issues that surround what you do for a living. So let's begin. Can you tell us where you were born?
In Cairo, Egypt.
And tell us about your parents. Tell us a few things about your mom, including her influence on your life, Marie.
Well, my mom completed high school. She didn't go to university. She was brought up in a traditional Middle Eastern background. She was expected to do the next thing that a woman would do, which is to get married. She did at 21, quite unhappily about it. My dad was a pharmacist, very different in personality. And both are Lebanese of origin. My family actually is predominantly Lebanese, but grew up in Cairo.
Now, your mother occupies a special place in your world. Tell us about that.
She does. Well, she's been the person that I think most shaped my sense of self. And my perception of myself was really because I was seeing myself through her eyes. She did not see me as a female that had limitations. She was really quite resistant and angry about the limitations that had been imposed on her in the Middle East. And part of the reason for coming to this country was to give me equal opportunity. And so I grew up in a household where I was not treated any differently. We didn't discuss things like getting married, having children. The only mantra in my house was, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do? And it really was focused on me sort of actualizing myself.
She said to you, I guess, in early years, it's never easy. It's never easy for you, Marie. What do you mean by that?
It's not easy to be in my skin, and sometimes not easy to be around my skin either. I don't rest easy. I think I talk a little bit about that. I'm a fundamentally restless person, constantly trying different things, wanting to see what's around the corner. I'm not a person who's easily satisfied by myself or by others around me, to be honest. So it's that mantra that it's never easy was a reference to that and the fact that I'm a hard worker. I always worked hard. The stuff didn't come easily. I was a straight A student, but I really worked hard at it. I always worked very, very hard and didn't, I don't think, sort of get my groove until this profession.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I told somebody who was coming this evening that that you seemed to blossom once you started in your early career. That your early days were just all kind of prep time.
And that's how I thought of it, Fred. It's really how I thought of it.
Yeah. Your mother. Did she teach you Middle Eastern ways? Is that?
No, she didn't subscribe to Middle Eastern ways.
Okay.
So she certainly didn't teach them to me.
Yeah.
And when other members of my family, like my grandmother's family, would come and tell her, when's your daughter going to get married? She'd say, not my daughter. There was no, she was removing me and protecting me, quite frankly, as much as possible. So she did not teach me Middle Eastern ways, no.
Your dad seems like a larger-than-life character, notwithstanding that he wasn't larger than life.
He is short.
Yeah.
It runs in his family, but he's a larger-than-life character. I mean, I think he never realized that he's 5'2", but he's very big in personality. He's very dynamic. He holds a room. He would have been a natural lawyer. He really would have been, or a politician.
Let's talk about that, because I understand that that was his aspiration.
It was.
Was to become a lawyer.
Yeah.
So why didn't he?
Because in the Middle East, nobody can afford lawyers, and becoming a lawyer was a useless profession. It would be an embarrassment to the family. You wouldn't have work. And so when he told his father he wanted to be a lawyer, his father said, well, what's that for? So you can spend your days drinking coffee at the cafe? So it was not something that was valued. And so he gave that dream up.
Now, he had some nicknames that I found kind of amusing.
Right.
Tell us about a couple of those.
You mean about us? Yeah.
You and your mother?
Yeah, he calls us the downtowners because he can't understand why anyone would go downtown. He hates the city. He calls us the unilinguals to insult us because, although my mother is not. She speaks 3 languages, but that to him is underwhelming because he speaks a lot of languages.
How many does he speak?
Oh my gosh, 6.
6, wow.
And keeps, I bought him the Rosetta Stone, the Spanish, and about 3 weeks later he said to me, is there a harder version? He'd just gone through it. He
Wow.
just, yeah.
Wow, that's cool. What was his influence on you?
That's interesting. I sort of struggled with that because this book was a bit of a self-discovery for me. Definitely intellectual. I mean, the interest in intellectual stuff, politics, really comes from my father's side. And he used to debate with me a great deal. We would get into, and still do, get into political arguments or arguments about literature. That was his gift to me. And my mother would always say to him, don't let her argue with you like that. And he'd say, no, it's healthy, it's good. So that, I think, was his contribution. And again, he did not treat me differently. I mean, I never was treated in a gendered way in our home.
I laughed out loud when I read in the book that he called your mother the liquor control board.
It's true. He still does. Yeah. And she is. Yes.
The family left Egypt, and I think the reason why is interesting in the context of Middle Eastern politics.
Yeah. Well, because he is Christian, it was very difficult as there was a shift in power to function, to get jobs. I mean, you had an identity card that had your religion on it. He found it untenable. And he found himself really, particularly him, quite displaced because he's blue-eyed and lighter-skinned and Lebanese origin. And he felt like he was not welcomed in what he believed to this day is his home. And he found it dangerous as well. So he thought it was just not feasible for him to continue to thrive, and it was not a place for his family to thrive. So he left.
He was told to his face that he was not a real Egyptian.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And to this day, when he tells that story, it bothers him.
Let's pinpoint the era. What was going on in politics in Egypt at the time that caused him the concern?
Well, at that time, Nasser had come to power and was undoing a great deal of years of corruption, but at the same time, and undoing feudalism, but at the same time also elevating not only Egyptian nationalism, Egyptian identity, but Muslim identity. Mm-hmm. And so in doing that, people that were European, people that were from other countries, many of my parents' friends left in droves overnight. And my parents had both gone to French schools, and it was feeling foreign to them.
And that was early days of the Muslim Brotherhood
Yes.
gaining popularity too.
That's right.
Yeah. Tell us about your sibling.
My brother, Peter.
Yeah.
My brother, Peter, is 6 years younger than me. He was a bit of an anomaly because after graduating from university, he decided he was going to go into the arts and became a stand-up comic for 6 years. So for my mother, who really valued education as a way forward, that was devastating to her. For 6 years, it was a constant refrain. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And 6 years into it, one day, Pete said to me that he was going to go to law school. And I said, what? You hated it. You said you'd rather die than be a lawyer. He said, no, I'm done. I'm going to law school. And he did.
And he's very successful.
He's very successful, yes.
Yeah. What impact did Pete have on you?
Well, he knows me like nobody else, I think. And often when we're in groups, we laugh because he has to decode and translate what I'm saying because he understands. He knows me in a way that I think most people don't.
You have some other intriguing characters in your family.
Yeah.
And we have limited time on this show, but I want to explore just a little bit with you. Tell us who Teta is and what her role in your life was.
Teta was my grandmother on my mother's side. I grew up with her. She took care of me when I was growing up. We never lived more than literally a few feet away from her. I spent most of my time with her, and I learned Arabic before I learned English because I was with her. She was a very dynamic, precocious woman who was just full of life and would go to New York and visit my uncle and loved it, just loved all of the craziness of that city.
You described her as precocious and a little flirtatious.
Yes, very much so.
And desperate for a bit of adventure.
And loved a good dirty joke, yeah.
She encouraged you in an interesting way. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, I think the constraints that she imposed, her expectations of my mother to be, a good wife and raise children and all of that, she did not impose on me. It was the complete opposite. Again, I don't know why I've been so lucky in my life that I was sort of told, go do whatever you want. And she thought I should be out there having fun and adventures and not conservative at all. I had a boyfriend and lived with a boyfriend, which in my culture is not usually an accepted thing, but it was accepted in my family. So she just believed that I should do what I want and spread my wings, and just was always supportive of that.
You concluded your chapter about her by saying, without her, I am not from there anymore.
Yeah.
What's behind that?
Well, she's the there for me. When we came to this country, she was our home base, and she grounded us, and we didn't have a clue. We had no clue about North American culture, about what most things were, and so she was our sense of home. And for me, the Middle East and that part of myself was grounded in her. I spoke Arabic to her always, and I would go to Middle Eastern stores with her, and that part of me was very much alive with her.
I think the statute of limitations would allow you to tell the story of some of her shopping habits.
Oh my gosh, the best shopper. First, and this is the best story, and it is a true story. She had a carpet that she had in the house for about 7 or 8 years, and she decided one day she didn't like it. So she rolled it up, and we brought it back to the Bay, where she returned it for a full refund. She also engaged in price switching relentlessly, and I didn't know it was a crime. But she would either she would take something, just switch the tag out, which I assisted her. There's a statute of limit. I was a YO, so they can't get me now. I'd help her with that, or she'd get something and say it was on the sale rack when it clearly wasn't, or the tag would fall off. And she thought it was completely fair game. But Hudson Bay wasn't losing money as a result of her, so I don't have a. And to be fair, I have paid more than full price since.
I believe it.
Yeah.
I believe it. Now, her husband, your maternal grandfather, was a character in his own right.
He was. He was a very quiet guy. He was in the Middle East. He was a bit of a rogue, a motorcycle riding guy, pretty outrageous, good looking, and lived a very good life and ran a good business. He had a trucking company. When he came to Canada, though, all of that was gone. All of their money was gone. They came with virtually nothing, and he lost all of that. And he became very, very quiet, I think, and very introverted and very disconnected from this country. I mean, he didn't get it, didn't understand it.
Now, your paternal grandparents, just briefly about them.
So I met only my paternal grandmother died very young, at 50, and so I never met her. I heard about her. I met my paternal grandfather, who was a hustler extraordinaire. I mean, he was like out of a movie, very dynamic, very just super bright, again, spoke multiple languages and, would hustle you, playing cards and things like that. He was a hustler. Like, I never knew what his profession was because I don't think he ever held a job for any length of time.
That's great. Now, there's a character in your life who is so appealing, Sammy. Tell us about Sammy and the relationship and the role he played in your life.
Yeah. Sammy is one of the reasons I wrote the book. He was my uncle. He was 10 years older than me, so we grew up more like siblings than uncle and niece. So I spent most of my time growing up with him. There are pictures of me in the book. He would dress me up, and I looked like an awesome drag queen in my mom's clothes. He was very excited about being in this country. He did not regret or fit in the Middle East. He was gay, and at about 17 or 18, decided to leave. He couldn't handle it anymore. He wanted his freedom and went to New York off on his own, and lived there until he got sick with AIDS. He was one of the first AIDS patients in Canada, in Toronto. It was when it was extremely new and there was no cure and everyone was terrified. And so he came back home to die. And he was a profound influence on me. I mean, when my mom would say, "What do you want to do?" there was only one answer: I want to go see Sammy. And I did. I was in New York constantly with him, going to clubs, doing all sorts of things that a suburban 16-year-old girl probably shouldn't be doing. And coming back, putting on my uniform, and thinking this was normal. This is how everybody lived.
Yeah. You said for 10 years after Sammy died, I could not say his name.
That is true.
It's profound.
That is true.
Yeah. You have a cousin named Hoda.
Yeah.
And she came into your life a little later, but was kind of a wild and crazy playmate, I guess. Is that fair?
Yes, she was. It was very interesting. She is my cousin on my father's side. Her parents divorced, and it was not a pleasant divorce. I lost touch with her. When I went to do my graduate degree in Columbia, I was awfully lonely. I didn't know anybody. Sammy had passed away, and so my mother said, "Why don't we reach out to your cousin?" And so we did, and we went to meet her. She was living in Queens. And I remember going in and seeing a piece of mail and seeing her last name and being shocked that someone else had the same last name as I did. I was like, what is going on here? She swanned in 2 to 3 hours late because she doesn't believe in clocks. And it was, at that time, was a limo driver and was driving around people like Michael Jackson, and it's just crazy. And she is a person, again, who is this larger-than-life, profoundly strong person. And we were immediately connected. And you couldn't explain it by family. It wasn't as though we had grown up together. But I don't know whether it's in the blood or something. There's just this immediate connection for us.
That's great. Thank you for indulging me by talking about the family, because I think our friends here will understand you and your pursuits in life better if they understand where you came from. Your childhood was interesting because you said right off the bat, I preferred the company of adults even at 5.
It's true.
Why was that, and how did that affect you?
Because I wanted to talk. I wanted to discuss things. I mean, I was very serious. I am. I tend to be. I mean, I can be funny, but I tend to be serious. And I didn't like hanging out with the kids and my cousins in the basement. I was always upstairs with the adults. I wanted to know what they were talking about and to engage with them. I mean, I had opinions, and they should hear them. I still have that view. So I was just more comfortable with that group. And I think I felt better, in the world as I got older, and began to connect with people. I wouldn't say elementary were banner years for me, elementary school, but by high school, when I started meeting people that were like-minded, it was just a different feeling. So I'm just a verbal person, and adults made more sense to me.
I should tell our friends here that the book I'm referring to is Nothing But the Truth, which is a memoir that Marie has recently written. And in it, you said, and I shook my head when I read it, the truth is, I am still that little girl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am. It's interesting. When women write their story, often it's a story of transformation, or that's what the publishers want. They want you to demonstrate how you're completely flawed and how you spend your life improving yourself, and then you become like a phoenix, you rise from the ashes. And I remember telling my publisher, no, I think I'm pretty good. I didn't think I needed to change my entire existence. So I'm like, the 5-year-old is pretty much the person that ends the book as well.
Okay.
I mean, we learn a little bit along the way. I hope I have. But I am that person. I mean, the elements of my personality that are both positive and negatives were evident then.
We can't leave people thinking that your family came to Canada, settled down, and lived here happily ever after.
They did not, no.
Because they didn't.
No.
Tell us briefly about the back and forthing.
Sure. The first time we came to Vancouver, actually, it was my mother and my father. We left my mother's family behind, and my mother had hives, literally, within 9 months. She couldn't understand anything. She felt very disconnected. It was very white for her. She just found it very strange, and she missed her family. So we moved back to Egypt, and then my family moved to Lebanon. Her family decided to come to Toronto. She wanted to come. My dad said, see ya, have fun. So we left for a year, and my grandmother was having none of it and said, you gotta go back. So we went back to Lebanon, but by that time, Lebanon was a cauldron, and it was literally explosive. My father felt, again, profoundly uneasy and concluded it wasn't safe to live there anymore. And when we landed, my dad said, I've got a surprise, we're leaving, and we came to Toronto.
Yeah. I felt sorry reading that about your dad, because so much of his early time in Canada was spent mourning for his homeland. And then he goes back, and it's not what he thought it would be.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
There is a statement, a chapter actually, chapter 2, and the title of it is, Where Are You Really From? Mm-hmm. Tell us the background to that.
Well, it's the question I'm asked constantly, and most often when I get into a cab, where are you really from? And I always say, from here. From Canada. They say, no, really, where are you really from? And it's never a satisfactory answer to say, I'm here, I'm from here, I'm from Canada. So that's where that title comes from. But now I just speak Arabic when I get in the cab, and it solves all problems.
You say in the book, for immigrants, we wear this otherness on our face, in our accents, in our tentativeness. Mm-hmm. I understand the face and the accent. What's the tentativeness? Is that a discomfort with the surroundings or an inferiority sense?
It's a discomfort with being accepted. Okay. I'll tell you a story. My grandfather used to say to me, do they hear your accent? And I'd say, I don't have an accent, I don't think. And he said, no, you do. You have an accent. They must know you're not from here. I said, no, I'm pretty sure I don't have an accent, Giddo. So he was concerned that, or another a great story is I had been invited to do a case that required high security clearance, which means that the government will contact your family and your friends and ask about you, right? They're clearing you. Mm-hmm. And so I warned my parents, and they were alarmed. They said, don't do it. I said, why? They said, because you're not from here. I said, Mom, I'm not a terrorist. They will, it's okay. They can call you. You can speak to the government. They're so nervous. That's the tentativeness. It's that people are going to know you're not from here. People will think of you as being less.
You do an interesting analysis of how your grandparents, your parents, and your generation adapt to the new country. Can you just give us a snippet of each?
Yeah, the grandparents were just grounding. They were just focused on the day-to-day existence. Parents were just thrilled to be here, and it was keep your head down, work hard. We're trying to set ourselves up for our children. Yeah. And the younger generation were just thrilled beyond belief. I mean, it was a new world, and you wanted to be part of all of it. You wanted to experience all of it. You know, I wasn't allowed to wear jeans until grade 7, I think. But I wanted to do all the North American things. I wanted to be, and so we were trying to wrap our arms around it. We didn't know what the hell it was, but we wanted to be part of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Which explains my insane obsession with Christmas.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Your mother wanted you and Pete to marry blue-eyed partners to improve the genetic pool.
We did.
Which you did, but your mother was a bit shocked.
She was. So, you know, my mom thought that's the only value in marriage was genetic contributions. And so she was meeting my husband's family for the first time. They're from Cambridge, and we went over, and on the car ride back, she said to me in Arabic, she said, "They're Canadian." I said, "I told you." And she said, "No, but they're real Canadians." So my mom has 2 categories.
Yeah, yeah.
There's Canadians and there's real Canadians. I said to her, what, I don't understand, what do you mean? And she said, "Because of the children." I said, "What about the children?" She said, "They were around and they were eating at the adult table." That for her is a sign of a true Canadian, is that you, because we were relegated to the basement. I mean, she would send us to the basement now if she could. Yeah.
You also quoted her as saying, "Marie, you didn't tell me they were that white."
Yes, yes, yeah.
Funny. Elementary school was difficult for you at the beginning.
Yeah, I didn't speak the language. I was completely clueless and quite isolated.
But by grade 7, you had developed your personality.
Yeah, I got over it.
Tell us the grade 7 story.
Well, the grade 7 story with the president, President Billy.
Yeah.
We had a president in class, and then we'd have this great parliamentary open forum, you know, once a week where you could raise issues with President Billy. I did not like the fact that the popular kids were sort of hogging the basketball court. Now, I don't play basketball, I never will, and I don't play sports at all, but it was a principled thing. I thought it was very offensive and very anti-democratic. So I decided to raise that with Billy in a somewhat aggressive way. I beat up on him, and he ran out of the room crying. And so my grade 7 teacher took me on a walk to explain how it wasn't ladylike of me to make the class president cry, that it was not appropriate. I felt good about it. And, you know, I did not listen to that teacher.
You mentioned earlier about secondary school and sort of coming out. And your mother, I've never heard the story before. Your mother tried to get you to stop studying?
Yeah, I'm slightly on the obsessive side, which might come as a surprise to people here. And I was completely, you know, you talked about it sort of always leading to law. It was my goal. And so I wanted to get to university. I wanted scholarships. And so I was obsessed academically, and had been actually in elementary school. And she would fight with me to say, "Stop studying. Like, try to do this without this level of obsession." And I couldn't, because if I didn't get 98 or whatever, I was, you know, I had failed, and I wanted to push myself. I always wanted to push myself. So that was the fight we would have at home, to stop studying.
And you went to a Catholic girls' school?
I did, yeah, I did.
Some of our audience will recognize the name of it.
St. Joseph's Morrow Park.
Right.
And it was on Bayview. It was this massive, incredible convent.
Beautiful.
And then a tiny part of it was the school. Yeah. You know, the school was interesting. Academically, it was actually very rigorous and very, very well, you prepared well for university. But the most important thing is I met my 2 best friends, Laura and Rita, both of whom became lawyers. And they were essential to my survival and my existence. We were so like-minded, and I tried to write them. It's interesting. It's the chapter that I wrote about 8 times. I could never quite get it right, and I still owe them a chapter. I couldn't quite capture all of them in the way that I wanted, but it was formative for me.
Special, yeah.
Yeah.
University,
Irrelevant, yeah. Could care
2
less.
years at the U of T,
Couldn't wait to get out.
get into law school.
I had no interest. Other than Can Lit, I was obsessed with that and enjoyed that, but I had no understanding of, I was living at home, first of all, didn't understand, like the university culture or whatever, and again, just totally obsessed with, I got 2 years as the earliest I can get into law school, okay, I got to do that.
Yeah.
That was the focus.
Yeah. You went to Osgoode Hall Law School.
Yep.
And your observations on the strengths and weaknesses of law school interested me, and we have some lawyers here. Could you just mention briefly your views on the curriculum?
Yeah, I think it's, first of all the stuff that you learn becomes largely irrelevant by the time you've graduated, because the law that's what's so fascinating about it. It's constantly changing. So the curriculum is somewhat flat, and when I taught, used to tell students is the value of it is that it teaches you to think in a particular way, and there is a way to think as a lawyer that I think makes you better. It lacks any practical training for lawyers. It lacks training in how to deal with a client, with the business of law, with advocacy. Trial advocacy or mooting is utterly irrelevant. I mean, it just does nothing for you. And so you go out into the world and you're handed a scalpel and told, okay, knock yourself out. I mean, it amazes me that you can graduate, get called and do a murder case the next day. There's no limitation on that.
Yeah, I agree. You then decided to article, and I quote you here, "If I didn't get an articling position at a criminal defense firm, I would have quit law."
That is true.
So you did get an articling position with a reasonable
Some guy,
lawyer. Yeah.
With Eddie Greenspan. Yes, I was, as I said, pretty single-minded. So I applied to about 8 or 9 criminal defense firms. That is all I did. And no Bay Street firms, no Crown's office, and just hoped I'd get a job. And again, because I had no understanding and no one in my family to tell me this is what you should be doing, I thought this was a smart move. And my parents didn't know any better. I mean, they were slightly concerned when I told them if I didn't get a job, we had a problem, but they didn't understand, it's going to be competitive and things like that. But the most important thing for me, because I had wanted it since university, was to work with Eddie. That was my dream job. That is the person I wanted to learn from, and it worked out, fortunately.
And there have been some very interesting people go through there. I think
it's incredible.
Telling you, my best friend at law school, Michael Mulday, who's now in the Supreme Court of Canada, went from law school to Eddie. And learned under his tutelage. You say, when I started articling, my law education really began.
It's true. It is true. Yeah. It is astounding how little you know. You finally get to the top of the academic heap. You feel like you know something. And you do compared to other university students, but you know nothing as a lawyer. You know absolutely nothing. It is stunning how many mistakes you make. It is stunning how little you know. And you begin to learn. You learn not only the practical components, but the feel for the law, right? The feel for how to construct a case. And I always said that it would take me about 10 years to get good at it, and then the next 10 years to get seriously good. But I thought 10 years was the baseline. You needed that amount of practice to get to a baseline of competence. And I believe that. I mean, I really do.
Now, you say in the book that you weren't worried about being able to do the work, but you were stressed.
Yes.
What were you stressed about?
Yes. Well, I was stressed about the responsibility, for sure. It wasn't the work. It was the responsibility of everything riding on you. What you did mattered, right? And it was mattering to real people.
You also said in the book, What I was really stressed out about was what I was going to wear.
Oh, that was for the articling interview, yeah. That was the most important issue, because I was very opposed to a blue suit, which I've worn today, by the way. It only took over 30 years. But I didn't want to look like a typical, it just wasn't who I was. So I was in 4-inch heels and not a blue suit and hair down to here and very long nails. Yeah. And a straight
That was the way I applied for my articling job, too.
There you go. Yeah.
Eddie made an interesting comment to you. He said, a real lawyer could not be precious. What was he getting at?
You got to get over yourself. It's not about you. I mean, it's not only is it not for the faint of heart, because I think that there's a bit of bravado with that. It was more than that. It's that you cannot be precious. You have to do it all. You have to do everything. You photocopy, you drive to the scene, you interview witnesses, you do your own legal research. You do it all. I type my own dictation. There's nothing that you're too good for. If you approach it as being too good for any of it, you will fail.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Including driving to Cambridge for donuts?
Donuts, yeah. Eddie's Donuts.
Yeah.
That's part of the job, man. You had to do it. You went to there and also East Mall, where there were very good donuts. There was always a competition.
You then, after your articling period, went off to New York. You mentioned that you went to Columbia Law School to get a Master of Laws degree. Mm-hmm. And then you came back from New York with no job.
Correct.
With no plans, with no direction. Yeah. How did you end up surviving?
Well, this is the strange thing, Fred, that I think the book is a bit of therapy for me, because I can't quite figure it out. You know that I'm pretty directed, and I've been focused on being in law school and and working for Eddie, and then and I'm getting a graduate degree. That was always in my plan. After I completed that, I just felt like I had tapped out a little bit. I didn't know what I wanted to do next. When I left Eddie's, he said there's not going to be a job back. There was no guaranteed job. I gave that job up to do my graduate degree. So I came back, and I did not apply for a single job. I applied actually to do my doctorate at U of T, and thought I guess I'll just try to figure it out. I got invited to work with Alan Young, Professor Alan Young, on a case that he was doing, and co-counsel on that case was Mark Rosenberg. Mm-hmm. So I found myself back in that office constantly.
Because Mark and Eddie were
partners, and it was the Robotham case, and I was there, often photocopying and doing all sorts of things. And one day, Eddie wandered into the photocopy room. That's where the job offer was made. He said, "Do you want to come back?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Okay." And that was it. And that's where I stayed for the next 11 years.
And no discussion of terms, as I understand it.
You've got to be kidding. The terms was you're lucky to be invited back. Yeah. There were no terms.
So you end up second chair to the great Eddie Greenspan. And by the way, Eddie has been on this program.
I know.
Was anyone at that program in the audience when Eddie Greenspan was here? Yeah. He was fabulous. He was just...
Of course.
It's a great show,
yeah,
Eddie.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. So you're second chair, and you learn a lot about Eddie. Can you just sort of tell us what the highlights of what you would learn about being a lawyer from being around Eddie Greenspan?
Everything. He was extraordinary. It always used to bother me. People would say, "Oh, anybody could do that," and to say it is to have zero understanding of the complexity of what he was doing. Yeah. And the problem was he made it look so easy, right? So when he stood up and did a cross, it was just so seamless. People thought, "Oh, sure, anybody could do it," but nobody did do it.
Right.
So I learned a lot of things. I learned how to construct a case. I learned how to construct a narrative. I learned how to conduct cross-examinations. I learned all the things that you need to learn as a lawyer, and then you make them your own eventually. But the basics, the essentials, were learned working hand in hand with him.
And you had to actually know Eddie to realize the hours he worked, which were killing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I write about this. 11:30 usually would be when he would call the office at night. And you were expected to be there. And sometimes he'd say, "Okay, I'm coming back." and he would come back. Sometimes he'd say, I'm coming back, and not come back, and you'd wait. And he was in the office on Saturday and on Sunday, as were we all. So that was his home. He loved it. And he thought about work all the time because it wasn't work. And when I left his office and we would go for lunch, 3 hours of lunch would be spent discussing law and restaurants. That was usually our two conversations. But you discussed it all the time because you love it. It's part of you. And he loved it. He truly did.
To be fair, to equal time for Mark, tell us just a little bit about Mark Rosenberg.
Mark was, first of all, Eddie's partner. They were an incredible team. He was absolutely brilliant. He was low-key guy, very low-key, but brilliant, so respected by the Court of Appeal. He ultimately was on the Court of Appeal, but he would get calls constantly from judges asking him, is this charge to the jury okay? Or advice from Crown attorneys. He was of that caliber, that everybody looked to him for advice and guidance. And he and I became very close friends.
And yet kind of an understated guy.
Super understated.
He could walk into a room and you would not run up to him for his autograph.
No, he was a very low-key guy, but he held a room when he spoke in the Court of Appeal.
Absolutely, yeah. So 10 years, you said, you thought it would take, and after 10 years, you went out on your own. Why did you do that?
Because I was becoming a bit of a surly teenager. I was getting, it was time to leave home. And I wanted to know whether I could be first chair. And I was never going to be first chair there. You could not be because people are coming in to retain Eddie, and that's completely understandable. And I wanted my name first on the letterhead. I wanted a woman's name first, all of that. I just wanted to test myself. I wanted to see if I could do it.
You paint an amusing picture as you describe what's going on in the rest of your life as you decide to go out and start a new business.
Yeah, I had a new baby, and we had just bought a house we couldn't afford, of course, and I had no clients, and I had no place to go, and decided over the weekend that I was leaving, told Eddie, not knowing whether he's going to say, okay, get out now or stay. Fortunately, he let me stay. And I opened up my office. I had to borrow first and last month rent from my parents for my law office. And that's what I did, and off we went.
Your father had some concern about clients.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, my dad is a very straight person. For his entire career, he did the same thing every day and is not a risk taker. And so he's extremely concerned when I opened up my office. And my dad to this day, if the phone rings, he's alarmed that there is such a thing as a phone. And he always looks at you and he says, who's calling? It's to this day. So he never would pick up the phone and talk to me. But when I opened up my firm, he would pick up the phone and call me every day. And every day he would call and he'd say, so, what's going on? And I said, I'm here. Nothing. I'm here. He says, so does anybody know you're there? And I'd say, I don't know. And he'd say, okay. So how do you get clients? Because he doesn't know the business. I said, I didn't either, though. To be fair, I said, I don't know. And he said, okay, talk to you tomorrow. And he'd hang up and he'd call me again. And so fast forward, at a big event, I was the outgoing president of the Advocate Society. My dad was there, and I looked down. And I said to him, Dad, I think they know I'm out there. And he laughed. He was like, okay, great. All right, you're going to be okay. Yeah.
You talk in the book about attire and about the importance of looking professional,
yes,
but being comfortable and reflecting who you are. And your comment is, men don't have to explain their suit choice.
No, it's true. They should, but they don't. That is true. That is true. It's okay. I always tell my husband, why is it okay for an adult male to look like he's dressed from Baby Gap? I've never understood. But yes, women are constantly held to account for what they look like.
Yeah. Funny. Let's continue on that theme. Let's talk some more about women in law.
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about fashion, but okay. I have things to say, Fred, that are very important.
We're building to the fashion section.
Because I have a thing about Madras shorts, which if you have gone to the Gap, you know what they are, and you should never wear them. But yes, let's go.
So you're often asked why you became a criminal lawyer, as if to say, why on earth would you choose something so unseemly? And I quote from the book there. How do you deal with that?
It depends on the day. Some days I'm a little more patient in explaining it. I think what is included in that is an accusation, which is, why would you do something so immoral? Why would you choose to do something so terrible? And I have never, most people don't wake up and spend years in university trying to figure out what's the most terrible and immoral thing I could spend my life doing.
That's right.
So it certainly wasn't the plan, and certainly not what I am doing. I've always valued the justice system and the role of all justice participants. For me, defense was the right zone for a lot of reasons. And I respect the role very, very much. I'm proud of the work that we've done as defense lawyers.
You differentiated between you personally and the job you do in the book, where you said, the fact is, I am neither polarizing nor controversial. What is my choice of profession. Why is there a sense that women shouldn't be in law when more than 50% of the applicants or the admittance to law school are female?
Well, I don't think it's that women shouldn't be in law. They just shouldn't be in certain types of law.
Criminal law.
No, you can be a crown attorney, but you cannot be a
on the good side.
That's right. You cannot be a defense lawyer. And if you're a defense lawyer, you have to reject certain cases. Apparently, you can be a judge as well as a female. And I don't know if you're allowed to ever acquit, but you can be. So it's just certain types of law that apparently are supposed to be forbidden.
Where you've written fairly widely on the public perception of criminal defense work as opposed to the reality of why you're there and what you uphold.
Right.
But you did touch on how people want to differentiate between the characters of certain accused and the character of other accused, as if personality or status or role or background makes a difference in how you should be treated in the judicial system.
Sure.
Which is just completely contrary to what the system's all about. Where do those ideas come from?
Well, it's a moral assumption. I mean, I use this example in the book. Nelson Mandela was on the terrorist list. I mean, the president of the United States described him as that, and was jailed. He was a lawyer, and he was jailed. And people in that country thought that they knew who deserved a defense or not. And we seem to forget that who you think is worthy of a defense is often dependent on where you're sitting. And that's the whole point of it. The point of it is that we do not allow people based on their personal views to decide who's worthy of this, a defense. That is all you're getting. You're getting the opportunity to have someone challenge the state, to have someone advance whatever case you may have. And so I have zero time for people who think they know who deserves a defense, who's entitled to it. I'll give you another example, Guy Paul Moran, who was vilified and is subsequently found not guilty, is exonerated. Well, there have been numerous wrongful convictions. Making a Murder, those two lawyers who are super talented, I met with them, and they said at the time that the trial was going on, they were not able to get a meal in that town because everybody assumed this guy was guilty. Then they became internet stars. So we need to remember that the whole point of allowing everyone a defense is that we know we don't always have it right, and you have to have the other side argued, whether you like that person or you don't like that person, that as a society, as a community, as a democracy, there is value to giving voice to all sides. And so I have no patience for people who are going to think they can tell me who I can and cannot defend, or assume that I'm morally bankrupt because I defend people they personally don't like. I could care less.
Yeah. Good for you.
Morgenthaler, by the way, was charged with crimes. There is often. And people defended him, and people were vilified for defending him. So I think we really have to be careful.
You very precisely summarize what the function of the criminal justice system is by saying it's not retribution, it's not vindication, and it's not closure, because there's so much feeling stuff in the public's mind about what's going on. But you then say the function is to determine whether the state has proved the case beyond a reasonable doubt such that deprivation of liberty is warranted. That's really your credo in life, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's the focus of it. There are rare cases. There are rare cases where, in the context of a criminal charge, bigger issues are being adjudicated, and ultimately only at the highest levels, like prostitution, like abortion. Morgentaler would be an example, like legalization of drugs, right to die. There are cases like that, but 99.9% of cases, Fred, are not about that. 99.9% are about one event, one crime, one person charged, and whether or not the state has proven the case.
Right. You asked the question, or at least you say the public asked the question, and I'd like to ask it to you because there will be people here who will wonder about this. Can a good lawyer be a good person?
Oh, it's a question posed, actually, by a legal ethicist.
I know.
Yes.
Of course.
Of course they can, and are.
There is a sense sometimes by people who perhaps don't understand the system that they say the accused has all the rights.
Yes, I'm sorry to laugh.
Yeah.
Yes.
You've heard that before.
I have, yeah. The accused does not have all the rights.
Yeah.
They do not have all the rights. We all have the rights.
Yeah.
We all have the rights. Yeah. And the point is that the accused, when they are charged with a crime, is the person who's in a position to assert those rights. So you, if the cops come to your door, Fred, and knock it down and ransack your house and don't find drugs, will likely be very upset about it, may consider a civil suit, probably won't proceed because it's too costly, and will go on your way. Or if you are stopped in your car and harassed by a police officer without cause and nothing happens, you will go on and nothing will come of it. You will have no rights to assert, notwithstanding the rights you have been breached. If they do that and they find drugs in your house, you now are in the criminal system, and you now will have the opportunity to assert those rights.
Right.
So we all have the rights. And often it's that poor accused person who is bringing those rights to the fore and challenging the state's breach of those rights. And in those contexts is where the courts are advancing and defining our rights and putting limits on what the state can and cannot do. So it is wrong to say that the accused has all the rights. And I can assure you, most accused would give up the rights if they were not accused. They trade them out.
Yeah, I'm sure. You speak to a tension between truth-seeking and fairness.
Right.
Some people wouldn't understand the distinction you're making.
It's a tough one, and it's a calibration that is very different depending, quite frankly, on which legal system you're in. The Anglo-American legal system is very different than the continental system. So I think we, particularly because of TV, we believe that the purpose of a court is to get at the truth. But I'll give you an example. We do not believe that you should obtain a confession by torture. Mm-hmm. Even if the confession is subsequently proven to be true, we would not admit it, because we say in this country that torture is not a way to gain evidence. It's not an appropriate mechanism. And so we are prepared to give up balancing truth for fairness, because we believe that certain things require citizens to be treated in a particular way by their government, and we won't broach that. But when we think back, for example, to 9/11, when we think back to Guantanamo Bay, and we think back to the use of torture to elicit confessions in that context, and the litigation around that, there was a real discussion, a real debate about could you justify it in any circumstances. So there is always a push and pull. We have principles in our legal system, constitutional rights, that are not focused on truth-seeking. They're focused on fairness, and then with other rules that are focused on truth-seeking. And so that's always in tension, and we adjust that calibration throughout the development of the legal system, and often depending on where we are in society and what our thinking is around certain issues.
A defense lawyer is to defend the lawyer to the best of their ability. But sometimes, through television and other media, the public get the sense that criminal defense lawyers use sleight of hand, dishonesty, deception. Is there any situation, does that public perception in any way?
It's completely untrue.
Okay.
First of all, we are bound by ethics, obviously, from the Law Society. There is no lawyer that is worth their salt that is not highly ethical. And sleight of hand, as I always say, works once, and then you're done, because everybody knows the trick.
You can't do that.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
You can't do it twice.
Yeah.
So, the fast and loose doesn't really work. It's not effective. I found what is effective is that you mean what you say, and you say what you mean, and people then know to take you seriously, that you will, you don't make empty threats, and you don't play fast and loose. And in our business in particular, where you're dealing with the same group of people, the same prosecutors all the time, reputation is absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And a lack of integrity ends it for many lawyers. They're just not ever able to function properly and are doing a disservice to their clients. So it's not like what they show on TV. It really is not.
And I think I should say on your behalf, because I know this to be the case, that your reputation at all levels of the judicial system is unparalleled.
Thank you.
Because people trust you. They know that you're a straight shooter. So good for you. If I had to pick one question that this community has asked me to ask you, it would have to do with how we fix the sexual assault process in the prosecution of sexual assault cases in this country. I don't think the people that have asked me this are on one side or the other of that issue. They just think, isn't there a better way that we don't have to destroy so many people in the process of going through that trial? The issue, of course, is uncorroborated evidence, and who do you believe if there's only two people who...
Well, most evidence is uncorroborated. I mean, let me just, first of all, dispel that, because I get clients who always call, and they'll say, it's just a he said, she said. And I say, that's evidence, right?
Yeah.
I don't understand. You've been watching too much TV. People get convicted on the evidence of a person. Most cases are not forensically proven. Most cases involve people coming and testifying and saying, this is what occurred, and they're either believed or disbelieved. So, first of all, I think you need to dispel this idea that is an unusual event. It is not an unusual event. It is difficult, but in most cases where you don't have forensic evidence, which is the large majority, you are left in a situation where a judge must make determinations based on the evidence, and that is the testimony that they hear. So let me go to the question that you asked, which is, how can we make it better? Well, we have been making it better to a certain extent by adjusting rules of evidence that were profoundly gendered, and that was happening in the 80s and continued through the 90s and continues to today. But there will be no day that you can have a different method of litigation, the system is an adversarial system, or a different standard, because evidence has to be tested. And there's only one way. I mean, a person comes to court, they can't simply just say anything and then you say, all right, no questions. You have to ask questions. It's in the asking of questions that you can advance your theory, elicit evidence. So unfortunately, that is the construct of a criminal trial. It doesn't matter what the nature of the crime is. There are things we can do to improve it. One is to ensure that victims, and I represent victims, and often they'll come to us because they're not getting the support that they need, and they're not getting an understanding of the system, right? They're getting it from very bad sources. So they need navigation through the system, and the government did, for a while, have a pilot project where complainants could have counsel. It is so important because a lawyer in your corner explains, decodes, prepares you, to testify, and often addresses many things that that victims may not know. And there are often many explanations for things you think, oh, how could I explain this? And the truth often is a most incredible explanation, a most reasonable explanation.
Yeah.
That is the role of a lawyer when you're preparing a witness, when you're preparing a victim to testify, is to take them through that and prepare them. So that's number one, because they often go through the system on their own.
Yeah.
And they don't, it's as foreign to them as it is to the accused.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing. And I think we have to think sometimes of alternative ways of resolution, because sometimes the criminal process isn't always satisfactory and isn't the thing that a victim wants. And so you see more victims, for example, proceeding through civil cases because you have more control over the litigation. And there are also some movements to more restorative justice, which may be applicable in certain cases, not all, obviously. So it's a complicated issue, and it requires tweaking. But I think one of the questions that I would like people to think about is how we cannot make sexual assault trials fairer. We have to do that. But how we can have less sexual assault. And that is a fundamental question. Because by the time we've gotten to court, and I say this, the bad things happen, the crime has happened. We've failed as a society. So what I'd like someone to ask is, how do we make women safer? How do we, and there are lots of ways, including economic, educational empowerment. These are correlated directly to the incidence of violence against women. I would like that to be as vibrant a conversation, because I would like never to have one of those trials again. I think that would be an incredible result. But we have them, and we need to improve, and we need to sensitize. And I think one of the other things is the judiciary. As you change the composition and the awareness, you know, the sorts of stereotypes that existed just begin to fall away.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Thank you. Good answer. There will be people here who will want us to talk about war stories, who want you to dissect cases by name and what they were thinking, and and you don't do that. Why don't you do that?
Well, you know, I always think of it this way. Can you imagine if you go to your doctor and then they get up on stage and say, you know, let me tell you about the examination I did of Joe Smith. So we did the colonoscopy, and it was really... Nobody needs that. And, you know, I think not only have my clients been through enough, the people that are the witnesses have been through enough, and they do not need me to be doing a quarterback debrief about what I thought of them, what I thought of my client, what I thought. I think that is not why they came to my office, and that is not why they engaged in the criminal system, and so I don't like doing that. I will do it in the context of talking to law students if there's a component that is supposed to be educational, but I'm not a war story gal, sorry. Which I know was a disappointment to some people.
I'm sure it is. I will raise one case, but only because of the aftermath to it, and that's the Jian Ghomeshi case. And
I didn't know you'd raise that one. Can you remind me, what was that case again?
I don't know where I drew that name from.
Where was that case?
Yeah, what was that guy's name?
Yeah.
How's that spelled?
Yeah.
What I want to talk about is not the case, not the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about the aftermath, the public reaction to you and to the decision, and that obviously you were frustrated and horrified by that. But your husband and your one of your law partners suggested a solution. Well,
you know, I didn't do any media interviews during that trial, and I don't normally. And so after the trial, people wanted to speak to me. I did not. I refused, and was hoping because when you're in a trial, you're so focused, you literally do not know what's going on around you, and you can't because you get distracted. You know, what's important is what's happening in the courtroom and the judge, and that's it. But when you step back and you're seeing marches across the country and people getting very upset, what was concerning to me was that nobody was engaging with the public to explain what had occurred and to try to decode it, because what we do is a mystery. Not to convince anyone of anything, but just to say, okay, let me just tell you a little bit about what this is. And I was hoping that would happen. It didn't. And so ultimately, Peter Mansbridge had asked me to do an interview. I'd said no, and then tried to convince him to take a panel. I put some names forward. It was a no-go. And finally, my husband and my law partner, Danielle, said I needed to speak. I did not want to be the one to speak because I felt the members of the public would view me as the advocate. And so how are they going to hear what I thought should be conveyed in a neutral way? But they said I should, so I did. And Peter didn't even advertise it because he was so nervous that I was going to pull out at the last moment, because I genuinely did not want to do it. And then it aired, and I didn't watch it, but someone told me that it was airing over 2 weekends. And so I emailed Peter and I said, I'm really glad it went well, but I think there's a person that probably doesn't want you to air a second episode because it's not that interesting. And so I'm wondering if you could consider not. And he said, no, thanks. We're going to air it. And I said, okay. I eventually did watch it. But that was how that played out.
The reaction to it?
The reaction was incredibly, incredibly positive from across the country. And, I was getting even emails from military personnel and letters, and it was very meaningful to me, actually. It was a very positive experience because it was an opportunity to speak to the Canadian people and to try to, first of all, to stop being this thing that they're seeing walk in court and never speak directly to them, and to explain my understanding of the system a little bit in a way that hopefully would cause Canadians to feel proud of it rather than ashamed, which doesn't mean you can't criticize it. You can, but you shouldn't be burning it down. It's really important. It is really important, particularly in these times. We should feel it deeply, and we should be very protective of our legal system.
I want to just quote 2 or 3 of those letters, if I may. One person thanked you for talking about our justice system and for making Canadians proud of it.
Yeah.
Another person said, you're a good Canadian. Another person said, you represent Canada well.
Yeah.
Another person said, you made me proud of our country.
That was, when people say what's sort of the most significant thing in your career, it was that. It was those letters. I took those letters to my parents and said, I want to read you something. And I read them some of the letters, and it was because I was being referred to as a good Canadian. That was the point of it, that I was being embraced by Canada. And it was such a meaningful moment for my parents. It was so deeply meaningful and moving to me, and is probably one of the highlights of my career, that I got embraced by members of the public as a Canadian, and that they saw that how much I love our justice system. It was just, it's one of the most profoundly meaningful, unexpected moments in my career.
Your father's reaction to the letters brought tears to my eyes. Can you?
He said, it's why we came. It's why we came. Yeah. I mean, he's still, I write about this a little bit, but, he for a long time didn't understand that I was a more public person than I sure as heck ever thought would happen. And so people would meet him and say, oh, is that your name? Do you know Marie Henein? And he said, it's my daughter. And he was very surprised. Like every time, for the longest time, he'd say, someone knew who you were. The guy at, Home Depot knew who you were. It was a constant shock to him. It was a surprise to him that other people would know who we are. And I always said to him, I'm keeping my last name because if I do anything, it's our name. I mean, you should be connected to it. And I think he now, at 91,
wow,
sees it. So, yeah.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Yeah. The book begins with the oddest introductory comment I think I've ever read. It says, I thought a lot about not writing this book.
It's true. It's true.
Tell us why.
Well, I was pitched to write a book. I kept getting these offers, and I kept saying, I'm not writing a book which is an analysis of cases. I'm not doing it, so no. And when I figured out what it was that I wanted to write, it required me to be honest in a way that I don't like sharing. I don't like sharing my private life. I'm a private person. Yeah. I didn't think I could write it and convey what I wanted to convey without doing that. And that's why I really thought a great deal about not writing it, because I knew the shape of it and what I wanted to do. And part of it is to show people a little bit more of what they were seeing. You know, all you're seeing is me walking in and out of court, but there's more to it. Not to cause people to say, oh, wow, but to cause people to say, I relate to her. Because I think, people would say, oh, your story is so extraordinary. And I'd say, well, no, it's a very ordinary, common story. There are millions of me. There are millions of immigrants in this country. And there are so many of us that have this story. And so if you read it and you say, wow, if she can do it, I can do it, or her theta reminds me of my grandmother, then I think that was the goal. So I couldn't get to that, I thought, if I didn't share stuff that, quite frankly, I'd rather not talk about. But there you go.
Well, I was going to say, the book is remarkably candid, and it's almost too introspective. I mean, you go so deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in our profession, which is a bit of a cynical profession, yeah. I remember talking to a judge, and he said, when I told him I was writing a book, he said, well, what are you going to write about? I said, well, not my cases. He says, well, then what do you have to say?
Yeah,
and I said, that's not a good start.
Yeah.
So, it's one thing for members of the public to be reading it, but our profession as well to be reading it. You just know that because it's not your typical lawyer's book, that it might not necessarily be well received. But too bad.
Well, yeah, exactly. I read it twice because I didn't know what I was getting into.
Ah.
But I have to say, and I do recommend it to any of you to read it. It's tremendously inspirational.
Oh, thank you.
It just made me really proud to be a Canadian, and frankly proud to be a lawyer.
That's great.
And how often do we get to say that? Marie, I have a potpourri, I'm going to call it. It's just a few things I want to get a reaction to you from. You say criminal law is a crisis management job.
Yeah.
I'm sure people who aren't involved in that milieu might not know what you mean. Can you expand on that?
Sure. It's crisis management because there is nobody in my office who's not dealing with one of the biggest, if not the biggest crisis in their life. Yeah. They're losing everything. And by everything, their freedom, their home, access to their children, all of it. So you are problem solving and dealing with problems and a crisis every single day. I mean, that is what your job is, and to attempt to navigate people through it and alleviate some of it.
Cross-examination, you say you have to understand human nature.
Oh, yeah.
Elaborate?
Well, because some of the best you can prepare forensically for a cross, and there's ways to do it, and you do, but so those moments are based on your ability to read exactly what's happening. And remember, often it's a person you have never met before, you have no knowledge of, but sometimes it is something as small as a tone change or an eye movement, and your gut tells you. I remember Danielle, my partner, saying one day, because I went off on a tangent with a witness, and she said, "How did you?" The witness admitted perjuring herself. She said, "How did you know?" I said, "I just the moment, the way, there was a word that was used, and I knew." And so you go. So that's the understanding human nature. And Eddie was masterful at that. Like, he had a real sense of the moment.
Some people say it's a sixth sense.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah,
it is. It's a reading the room. There are people who have a high EQ. There's people who are intuitive a little bit, and yeah, that intuitive sense, that's just something either you have it or you don't, and it's just that's understanding human nature.
You used an interesting play on words when you said that, you used a basketball analogy. You said Eddie could read the court.
And
Two courts.
Yeah, he could. And he could see the court, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You describe both you and Eddie as outsiders. Did Eddie feel like an outsider?
100%. Yeah, he's a small town kid from Niagara Falls, Jewish background and a very waspy business.
Yeah.
That was never, not only was it not lost on him, I don't think it was ever forgotten. He's talked about it. He did talk about it. He was very much an outsider.
Yeah.
And, criminal law tends to draw outsiders. I think we're all a bit of a band of outsiders. And generally, if you like the status quo, you're not going to go into criminal law.
Effective advocacy, you say, is about confronting the weaknesses in your case and overcoming them, which involves a combination of humility and rigor.
It's true. I mean, clients will always come and say, tell me the great things about my case. And I always say, you're asking the wrong question. You want me to tell you the problems in your case.
Yeah.
Because the great things in your case, anybody can tell you that. It's the problems in your case that have to be confronted and identified and then dealt with if they can be dealt with. So you have to confront the weaknesses of your case. If you walk into a courtroom thinking you're the smartest person in the room, you're going to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, you're not going to deal with the serious problem, you're going to lose. And most of your case is directed at dealing with the thing that needs to be answered. Mm-hmm. There's a thing that needs to be answered, and if you don't answer it, you are very silly if you think the judge is not going to notice that you failed to provide an answer. So it's all about the weaknesses in your case.
You talk a bit in the book about threats to the judicial system, and you say you feel that the justice system, which you feel is one of our most important democratic institutions, is on shaky ground.
Because of the attack, because of the delegitimization by politicians, because of the silliness when you hear politicians saying, I'm elected, they're not, and so that I'm more legitimate, which is such a fundamental misunderstanding of the basic democratic principles and branches of democracy. But that is a mantra that has been picked up in Canada, certainly picked up in the United States with Trump, who was very loud banging that. Yeah. And that is a problem. That is a very significant problem.
You mentioned a certain former president with the initials DT. Mm-hmm. I couldn't help but think of him when you said, delegitimizing the justice system is a winning strategy for anyone who is seeking to consolidate power.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just horrific what he has done to the institutions of that once great country.
Sure, and he didn't come up with it, because I think we can all agree he's not brilliant.
Yeah.
And so he didn't sit there and invent the thing that Stalin hadn't invented, that Hitler hadn't invented, that in Hungary, Putin. I mean, how do you consolidate power? Well, let's look. You undermine the judiciary. You do not have an independent judiciary because they can check you, and you don't want to be checked. Yeah. And so he picked up the playbook. It's a really good, easy playbook. The problem, though, is that nowadays he was able to disseminate that message through social media in a way that is breathtaking, with in rapid fire, and it sticks. And so it's very dangerous right now. It's very dangerous to unseat it, and we see what's happening. And we should not be complacent in Canada and think we're better than that. We're not.
Yeah. There are people who accuse the courts of writing or rewriting our laws. Your reaction to that?
No. Their job is to interpret the law. So interpretation necessarily requires the application of some thought, some judgment, and so it's not rewriting the law. This idea of originalism, We have Roe versus Wade being reversed, and so we know how that works out. Yeah. But, here's the interesting thing. I was very heartened to see that, for example, today in Texas, it has been suspended. So, courts do their work, and people have a place to go and to litigate. As much as you hate one judgment, you can continue to fight and litigate and advance. So we should be, again, I go back to this, we should be very, very protective of our courts and giving them the role that they are there to occupy, which is to interpret, not to write, to interpret.
There are people who, on the other hand, think that the courts are designed to wrestle with the broader social issues in our society. Can you set us straight on that?
Well, they're not elected officials in the sense that they're making new laws, but they do wrestle with issues of concern by dealing with the legitimacy of laws, the constitutionality of them, interpreting the scope of our rights as the world changes. For example, in 1982, when you had a right against unreasonable search and seizure, you did not have an iPhone. I was picking up a phone that was screwed to a wall. So now when we talk about search and seizure and crossing the border, we have to talk about, can they take your phone that you carry that has all sorts of things on it, and can the state search it? So the court is constantly interpreting the scope of our rights in our current environment.
Right. Now, I did say that we get to the important stuff later.
This is the fashion vinyl?
The fashion stuff.
Thank God.
Yeah. So and I don't know whether you will want me to read this out or not, but here goes.
Go ahead.
Fashion victims such as myself have a tough time aging gracefully.
It's true. Yes. Well, I mean, before we came in, I said I had to fix my makeup, so I'm as vain as they come. Yeah.
But you also say in the book, I mean, it was really fun for me to try and figure out who you were reading the book, because you also say, I love playing dress up.
Yes.
And if I could spend my life sitting in a makeup chair, I would.
It's true. But where else is there that's better?
Well, maybe
it's like a person that's sitting there fawning. There's a person that fawns over you, Fred, and their job is only one thing, to make you look fabulous. How could that be a negative experience?
I guess I get it. Oh, by the way, I love...
think you don't.
Sorry?
I don't think you do. I'm going to put you in a makeup chair, Fred, and then you'll see how good it is.
When you turned 50, there was a lot of attention given.
That I was 50, correct, yes.
And a body rub parlor in Toronto tweeted, Marie Henein is kinda hot.
Kinda hot. I read it and I thought, wow, I can't even get a job there. I'm not even maybe I would be the discount person there. But kinda. Yeah, for women, aging is a very different experience and a challenging one. It's because our value isn't simply based on what you've done, what you've achieved, what type of person you are. It is tied very much to our physical appearance. Yeah. And so it is tough if you're vain. I wish I wasn't, but today, for example, I engaged in a very lengthy discussion with my law partner. I'll share this with you, Danielle, as to whether I should go gray anytime soon. And she said, I don't think so, but it was a very lengthy conversation. We probably built about an hour's worth of back and forth and sending pictures of when the right time is to go gray. These are the things we think about.
Yeah, well, it's important.
It's important.
Apparently.
It is.
Yeah. Closing thoughts on the emerging role of women in Canadian society and where we're at and how much further we have to go to get equality?
We have a long way to go. First of all, the United States Supreme Court has reminded us we have a long way to go. Yeah. And so complacency is not an option. But we've also not had a female prime minister other than one for 2 minutes. None are in the field. Yeah. There has not been a female president. 50% of us are in law school, but not 50% of us are partners, 13%. Yeah. So we still hold the lowest paying jobs, disproportionately so. Yeah. Women that are marginalized and racialized are subjected to violence in disproportionate levels. And so no, we've not done it. And that's just here. I mean, in Saudi Arabia, you can't leave your house without your husband's permission. So no, we have a very, very long way to go. And maybe when we get there, I won't care about my hair going gray. Who knows?
You attended an induction at the American College of Trial Lawyers, and a woman leaned over to you and said,
"You must be so proud of your husband." And I said, "I am. I'm almost as proud of him as he is of me, because I'm getting inducted." And she said, "Oh my gosh, how do you have children then?" And I said, "It hadn't occurred to me, but maybe you should ask your husband, because I gather you have children with him." And he's the lawyer, and that was the end of our conversation.
So we'll just talk briefly about family, because we're just almost out of time. You're married?
Correct.
Glenn?
As if this
What's Glenn do for a living?
He is a lawyer. He is a
A
lawyer.
lot of lawyers.
A lot of lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have 2 kids?
Yes.
Can you share your comment about whether you consider yourself a natural mother?
A what?
A natural, whether you say something
Natural
like,
mother?
"I'm not a natural."
Oh, I'm not a natural. Well, I mean, I'm not like an overly maternalistic. You know, I'm not warm and fuzzy. Like, it's not put on. This is who I am, right? I'm not a warm and fuzzy person. I'm a dedicated person, perhaps annoyingly so, as my kids would tell you. But I'm not soft.
Marie, we are out of time, but
Yes.
we have a world premiere announcement to make.
Oh.
Would you make that announcement?
Yeah. Fred was asking me, he was saying that the book is so great, it's so full of characters that you should make this into a movie. And I said, well, interesting that you say that. It's not a movie, it's a TV show, actually. So there it is, sitting in Hollywood. They thought some 50-year-old Arab lawyer in Toronto was an interesting topic, which I keep asking them, but why? They seem to think I'm interesting, so there you go.
That's exciting. Well, I will just quickly wrap up by thanking our friends at Rogers, thanking the MCC staff and volunteers, thanking our season sponsors, Bales, Dishaw, and Holloway, thanking HGR Graham Partners for sponsoring this show. I want to thank our team. We have a team of people who meet and decide what guests we're going to have, and they tell me everything I'm doing wrong. So thanks to John Farragher, Brian McKell, Lorianne Clancy, Jen Parker, Doris Sloan, and Jonathan Wallace. I want to just mention to you that our program next month will feature Canadian humorist Terry Follis, who is an award winner, won the Stephen Leacock Award a couple of times, and tickets have gone on sale today. Those of you in our live audience, we invite you to join us in the atrium. Maria is going to sign some books, and if you don't have one, she has some that you can buy. And I recommend it. Is a fabulous, fabulous read. Thanks to those of you who are watching this on a recorded version. Thanks for joining us. Marie, this has just been so much fun.
Thank you.
I am so impressed by you, and I am so grateful that you would join our show.
Thank you for reading the book twice.
Thank you. Yeah.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
After a night out with your friends, there's always options for getting home safely. You could call your BFF, your mom or dad, whoever you can count on for a safe ride home. You could call your favorite cab company or 1-888 taxi guy. Or you could use the Arrival Live smartphone app to help you choose your ride. Be it a friend, transit, or taxi, getting home safely is app easy. Now available for iOS